Everybody used the naive new girl in prison, till there was nothing left to use. She was playing her cello when the bottle smashed into his skull. Blood spread across the kitchen floor like spilled wine. Glass in her hands. The bow fell. Her stepfather on the floor, not moving. And when the police arrived, nobody believed it was self-defense. The judge didn't care. Her own mother looked at her in that courtroom like she was a stranger. They called her a murderer. They called her dangerous. That girl's name was Ivy Carter. She was 17, and this is the story of how everybody used her in prison until there was nothing left to use. By the time you finish watching this, you'll understand why innocence doesn't always survive, and why some people forgive even when they shouldn't. What happened to Ivy inside that prison will make you question everything you thought about justice. Have you ever been blamed for something you didn't mean to do? Then you'll understand her. Before Westmoor, Ivy Carter was invisible in the best way possible. She walked through her high school hallways with her cello case on her back, headphones in her ears, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Teachers loved her because she never caused trouble. Students forgot she existed 5 minutes after passing her in the hall. Her stepfather, though, he noticed her way too much. And that's where everything started falling apart. His name was Vincent. He moved in when Ivy was 14, right after her real dad left for good. At first, Vincent seemed okay. He paid bills. He made her mom laugh. But then the drinking started. The yelling. The nights when Ivy locked her bedroom door and played her cello so loud she couldn't hear him screaming downstairs. Her mom pretended not to notice. She worked double shifts at the diner and came home too tired to ask questions. So Ivy learned to survive by staying small, staying quiet, staying out of his way. That worked for 3 years. 3 long years of walking on eggshells, of hiding bruises under long sleeves, of telling herself it would get better once she turned 18 and could leave. But on the night of her 17th birthday, everything exploded. Vincent came home drunk, angrier than usual, and when Ivy's mom tried to calm him down, he shoved her into the wall. Ivy heard the crash from her room. She heard her mom crying, and something inside her just snapped. She grabbed the only thing within reach, an empty glass bottle from the recycling bin, and ran downstairs. She didn't plan what happened next. She just reacted. The bottle connected with the side of his head. Glass shattered. Blood sprayed across the kitchen tiles. Vincent dropped like a stone, his eyes rolling back, his body going limp. Ivy stood there, shaking, the broken bottle neck still in her hand, not understanding what she'd just done. Her mom screamed. Neighbors called the cops. And when the sirens arrived, nobody asked Ivy if she was defending herself. Nobody asked if she was scared. They just saw a dead man, a bloody teenager, and a story that was way too easy to believe. The prosecutor called it premeditated. The defense called it tragic. The jury called it guilty. Ivy's mom never visited her once during the trial. Not once. She sat in the back of the courtroom on the first day, arms crossed, face blank, and when the guilty verdict came down, she just walked out. No would be, no tears, nothing. That silence hurt worse than the handcuffs, worse than the orange jumpsuit, worse than the judge's voice echoing through the room as he sentenced her to 15 years. Ivy Carter, the quiet girl who'd never broken a rule in her life, was now inmate number 7439, and the world she knew was gone forever. When the prison transport van pulled up to Westmoor Correctional Facility, Ivy pressed her face against the window and stared at the concrete walls, the barbed wire, the guard towers that looked like something out of a nightmare. The other women in the van were laughing, cursing, making jokes about what they'd do when they got out. But Ivy couldn't speak. Her throat felt like it was filled with glass. She clutched her knees to her chest and tried to remember the last time she felt safe. She couldn't. That feeling was gone, and deep down, she knew it wasn't coming back. The processing room smelled like bleach and sweat. They took her clothes, her jewelry, even the hair tie from her wrist. They handed her a scratchy gray uniform, a pair of worn-out sneakers, and a rolled-up mattress that felt like cardboard. A guard with dead eyes pointed down a long hallway and said, "Cell 42. Keep your head down and you might survive." Ivy wanted to ask what that meant, but the guard was already walking away. So she picked up her mattress, followed the painted yellow line on the floor, and stepped into the loudest, coldest, most terrifying place she'd ever been. The cell block was chaos. Women shouting across the tiers. Metal doors slamming. Someone laughing like a hyena. Another voice screaming threats that made Ivy's stomach turn. She walked past cells where inmates stared at her like she was fresh prey, their eyes tracking her every step, their whispers crawling under her skin. She kept her head down just like the guards said, but it didn't matter. They saw her. They knew. She was new. She was scared. And in a place like Westmoor, that made her the easiest target in the building. Cell 42 was at the end of the block, tucked into a corner where the fluorescent lights flickered like dying fireflies. Ivy stepped inside, and the door slammed shut behind her with a metallic clang that echoed in her chest. The cell was tiny, barely 10 feet across. 2 metal bunks bolted to the wall. A stainless steel toilet with no seat. A sink that dripped brown water. And sitting on the bottom bunk, arms crossed, eyes like shards of ice, was Roxanne. She didn't say a word. She just smiled. And that smile told Ivy everything she needed to know. She wasn't safe here. She never would be. What would you do if you walked into hell and realized there was no way out? Would you fight? Would you freeze? Or would you do what Ivy did and just try to survive one more day? Because that's all she had left now. Days. Each one harder than the last. Each one pulling her deeper into a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. And the worst part? This was only the beginning. The first night in cell 42, Ivy didn't sleep. She lay on the top bunk, staring at the ceiling, listening to Roxanne breathe below her. Every sound felt like a threat. The distant screaming from another cell. The footsteps of guards doing their rounds. The metal-on-metal scrape of something being dragged across concrete floors. Ivy's body was tense, muscles locked, heart pounding so hard she thought Roxanne could hear it. She wanted to cry, but she'd learned a long time ago that crying didn't fix anything. It just made you weaker. So she bit her lip until it bled and waited for morning to come. When the wake-up alarm blared at 5 in the morning, Roxanne swung down from her bunk and stood inches from Ivy's face. Up close, she was even more terrifying. Tattoos covered her neck and arms, dark ink spelling out names and dates Ivy didn't want to know the meaning of. Her eyes were cold, calculating, like she was deciding whether Ivy was worth the effort or just another piece of trash to be thrown away. She didn't say good morning. She didn't say anything. She just stared at Ivy for 10 long seconds, then walked out of the cell without a word. That silence was worse than any threat. Breakfast was served in a cafeteria that smelled like rotten eggs and industrial cleaner. Ivy grabbed a tray and stood in line, tried to blend in, try not to make eye contact with anyone. But it was impossible. The other inmates watched her like hawks circling a dying animal. Some whispered to each other and laughed. Others just stared, their faces blank, unreadable. When Ivy finally sat down at an empty table in the corner, 2 women immediately got up and moved. Nobody wanted to sit near the new girl. Nobody wanted to be associated with weakness. And Ivy, she was the definition of weak right now. She barely touched her food. The scrambled eggs looked like rubber. The toast was hard as cardboard. But it wasn't the food that made her stomach turn. It was the eyes. Everywhere she looked, someone was watching her, judging her, sizing her up. She felt like a deer in the middle of a highway, frozen in the headlights, waiting for the impact. And then, from across the cafeteria, Roxanne caught her eye and smiled. Not a friendly smile, a predator's smile. The kind that said, "I own you now, and you don't even know it yet." Ivy looked down at her tray and didn't look up again until the bell rang. After breakfast, the guards lined everyone up for work assignments. Ivy got assigned to the laundry room, a hot, humid hellhole in the basement where industrial washers rumbled like thunder and the air was so thick you could barely breathe. She spent 8 hours folding sheets, scrubbing stains, and trying not to collapse from the heat. The other women in the laundry ignored her completely. They had their routines, their groups, their silent agreements about who did what and who stayed out of whose way. Ivy was an outsider. She didn't belong, and nobody was going to help her figure it out. On her 3rd day, Ivy made her first mistake. She was in the laundry room, folding a pile of gray uniforms, when she accidentally knocked over a basket of clean sheets. They spilled onto the floor, and before she could pick them up, a woman named Tasha stormed over. Tasha was built like a linebacker, arms like tree trunks, face scarred from fights Ivy didn't want to imagine. She grabbed Ivy by the collar and shoved her against the wall so hard the air left her lungs. "You spill my clean work, you redo it yourself," Tasha growled. "And if you ever touch my stuff again, I'll break your hands." Ivy nodded, gasping, and Tasha let her go. Nobody said a word. Nobody helped. They just kept working like nothing happened. That night, Ivy sat on her bunk and stared at her hands. They were shaking. She couldn't make them stop. She thought about her cello, about the way the strings felt under her fingers, about the music that used to fill her small apartment and drown out the chaos. She wondered if she'd ever touch an instrument again. She wondered if she'd ever feel anything other than fear. And then Roxanne climbed up to the top bunk, leaned over the edge, and looked down at her. "You're soft," Roxanne said quietly. "That's going to get you killed in here. Unless you find someone to protect you." Ivy's throat tightened. She wanted to ask what that meant, but Roxanne was already gone, back down to her bunk, leaving Ivy alone with the weight of those words. The next morning, a guard came to her cell before breakfast. His name was Officer Briggs. Tall, thick neck, dead eyes that looked right through you. He didn't knock. He just opened the door and said, "Warden wants to see you." Now, Ivy's stomach dropped. She hadn't done anything wrong. She kept her head down, followed every rule, stayed out of everyone's way. But that didn't matter. In Westmoor, being called to the warden's office was never a good thing. She followed Briggs down the long hallway, past rows of cells where inmates pressed their faces against the bars and whistled, shouted, made kissing noises. Ivy kept her eyes on the floor and prayed this wasn't the end. Warden Frank's office was on the third floor, far away from the noise and chaos of the cell blocks. It was clean, organized, a big wooden desk, leather chairs, a window with bars that looked out over the prison yard. Frank sat behind the desk, hands folded, smile calm and warm like a favorite uncle. He gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit down, Ivy," he said. His voice was soft, almost kind, and that terrified her more than anything, because kindness in a place like this always came with strings attached. Always. And Ivy was about to find out just how tight those strings could get. Frank leaned back in his chair and studied her for a long moment. "You're not like the others," he said finally. "I can tell. You're educated, talented. You don't belong here." Ivy didn't know what to say, so she said nothing. Frank smiled. "I'm going to be honest with you, Ivy. Life in Westmoor can go one of two ways. You can keep your head down, stay invisible, and let the vultures pick you apart piece by piece. Or you can accept help, my help, and in return, you do a few small favors for me. Nothing illegal, nothing dangerous, just cooperation." He slid a piece of paper across the desk. "Think about it." Ivy stared at the paper. She didn't touch it, but deep down she already knew. She didn't have a choice. Have you ever been offered protection by someone who scared you more than the danger itself? Have you ever felt like every choice you had was just a different kind of trap? That's where Ivy was now, stuck between Roxanne's threats and Frank's smile. And both of them wanted the same thing: control, over her body, over her choices, over her soul. But here's what neither of them knew yet. Ivy Carter might have been soft. She might have been scared, but she wasn't stupid, and she was paying attention to everything. Every lie, every threat, every smile that hid a knife. Because one day, she was going to use it all against them. If you think you know where this is going, you're wrong. Subscribe now, so you don't miss the moment everything breaks. Ivy took the deal, not because she wanted to, not because she trusted Warden Frank, but because saying no felt like walking off a cliff blindfolded. Frank told her the favors were simple: deliver sealed envelopes to certain guards, clean his office after hours when nobody else was around, keep her mouth shut about what she saw or heard. Easy, he said. Harmless, he said. But Ivy knew better. She'd seen enough crime shows to know that nothing in prison was ever harmless. Still, she nodded. She signed nothing. She just agreed with her silence. And that was enough for Frank. His smile widened. "Smart girl," he said. "You'll do just fine here." The first favor came 2 days later. Officer Briggs handed Ivy a small manila envelope during her shift in the laundry room. "Take this to Officer Kane in Block C," he said. Don't open it. Don't ask questions. Ivy's hand shook as she took the envelope. It was thin, light, sealed with red tape. She wanted to rip it open, see what was inside, understand what she was carrying. But she didn't. She walked through the cell blocks, past inmates who watched her like she was a ghost, and handed the envelope to Kane without a word. Kane didn't thank her. He just nodded and walked away. And that was it. Ivy's first job as Warden Frank's messenger. She felt sick the entire walk back. After that, the favors came faster. Every few days, another envelope. Another late-night cleaning session in Frank's office. Another whispered conversation she wasn't supposed to hear, but did anyway. Ivy started noticing patterns. The envelopes always went to the same 3 guards. The conversations always mentioned names, dates, money. She didn't understand all of it, but she understood enough. Frank was running something. Something dirty. Something that involved every guard who smiled at her a little too long. Every inmate who suddenly got privileges without earning them. And Ivy was stuck right in the middle of it, carrying his secrets like a mule. But the worst part wasn't the errands. It was what they cost her. The other inmates started looking at her differently, whispering when she walked by, turning their backs when she sat down. Even Tasha, who'd threatened to break her hands, now avoided her completely. Ivy had become untouchable, not because she was strong, not because she was respected, but because everyone knew she belonged to Frank now. She was the warden's girl. And in Westmoor, that label was worse than any crime you'd committed. It meant you were a snitch, a puppet, a traitor. It didn't matter if it was true or not. Perception was everything, and Ivy's perception was poisoned. Then Jeannie arrived. Week 4, a transfer from another facility upstate. She was small, maybe 5'3", with wild curly hair that looked like it hadn't been brushed in months and eyes that sparkled with something Ivy hadn't seen in weeks. Hope. Jeannie didn't walk into Westmoor like she was scared. She walked in like she owned the place, head high, grin wide, middle finger practically raised to the guards. Ivy watched her from across the cafeteria that first day and felt something stir inside her chest. Something she thought was dead. Curiosity, maybe even a little bit of courage. Because Jeannie looked at the world like it owed her an apology, not the other way around. They didn't talk until the 3rd day. Ivy was in the library, a tiny room with dusty books nobody read, and a single cracked window that let in pale sunlight. She was pretending to read a book about gardening when Jeannie plopped down in the chair across from her. "You're the new girl everyone's scared of, right?" Jeannie said. Ivy blinked. "I'm not scary," she said quietly. Jeannie laughed. "Not you. Them. They're scared of you because you're with Frank. But I don't buy it. You don't look like a snitch. You look like someone who got backed into a corner." Ivy's throat tightened. Nobody had said that out loud before. Nobody had looked at her like she was a person instead of a warning sign. And for the first time since she'd arrived, Ivy felt like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't completely alone. Jeannie didn't ask questions. She didn't push. She just started sitting with Ivy during meals, during rec time, during the long stretches of boredom that filled the days. She told stories about her life before prison, about stealing cars with her cousin, about getting caught because she stopped to pet a stray dog and forgot to run. She made Ivy laugh. Actually laugh. Not the nervous, shallow kind. The real kind that came from somewhere deep and forgotten. And slowly, carefully, Ivy started opening up. She told Jeannie about the cello, about Vincent, about the trial, about Frank's envelopes and the way everyone looked at her now. Jeannie listened, and when Ivy finished, Jeannie just said, "We'll figure it out. You're not alone anymore." For 3 weeks, Ivy believed her. She believed that maybe friendship could survive in a place like this. She believed that someone could care about her without wanting something in return. She believed that Jeannie was different. And then one afternoon, everything shattered. Ivy was walking back from the showers when she heard voices coming from the storage closet near the laundry. Loud voices. Angry. She slowed down, pressed herself against the wall, and listened. It was Roxanne. And Jeannie. "You owe me 2 packs of cigarettes," Roxanne growled. "I don't owe you anything," Jeannie shot back. "I already paid last week." Roxanne laughed, low and dangerous. "That was last week. This is now. And if you don't pay up, I'll make sure your little cello friend finds out what you're really doing here." Ivy's blood turned to ice. She didn't move, didn't breathe. Roxanne kept talking. You think she doesn't know you're using her? You think she's stupid? Every time you sit with her, you're buying yourself time. Protection by association. Smart. But it ends when I say it ends. Jeannie's voice was quieter now. Defeated. Fina, I'll get you the cigarettes. Just leave her out of it. Roxanne's footsteps echoed as she walked away, and Ivy pressed harder against the wall, heart pounding so loud she thought the whole prison could hear it. When Jeannie finally stepped out of the closet, Ivy was already gone. She didn't confront her. She didn't cry. She just walked back to her cell, climbed onto her bunk, and stared at the ceiling. She'd been used again, and this time, it hurt worse than anything Frank had done. The next morning, Jeannie tried to sit with Ivy at breakfast. Ivy stood up and walked away without a word. Jeannie followed her into the hallway. Ivy, wait. Let me explain. But Ivy didn't stop. She didn't turn around. She kept walking until she reached the laundry room, pushed through the door, and disappeared into the heat and noise. Jeannie didn't follow. And that was the last real conversation they ever had. Because 2 days later, Jeannie was gone. Transferred, the guard said. Paperwork got processed faster than usual. She left in the middle of the night without saying goodbye. But Ivy knew the truth. Frank had moved her. Punishment for getting too close. A reminder that Ivy didn't get to have friends. She didn't get to have hope. She only got survival. And survival meant doing exactly what Frank wanted. When Ivy asked Frank about it during her next cleaning shift, he didn't even look up from his desk. Your friend was a distraction, he said calmly. Distractions get people hurt. I was protecting you. Ivy's hands clenched into fists. I didn't ask you to protect me. Frank finally looked at her. His smile was gone. You don't have to ask. That's the deal. I keep you safe. You stay useful. And if you ever forget that, I'll remind you. He slid another envelope across the desk. Block D, Officer Torres. Tonight. Ivy took the envelope. She didn't say a word. But inside, something cracked. Something small and sharp. And for the first time since she'd arrived, Ivy Carter started thinking about something other than survival. She started thinking about revenge. Have you ever lost the one person who made you feel human? Have you ever realized the people protecting you were the same ones destroying you? That's where Ivy was now. Alone. Used. Broken. But not finished. Not yet. Because the thing about breaking someone over and over is eventually the pieces stop fitting back together the way they used to. And when that happens, those pieces become weapons. Ivy didn't know it yet, but she was about to become the most dangerous person in Westmoor. Not because she was violent, but because she had nothing left to lose. After Jeannie disappeared, Ivy stopped pretending. She stopped smiling when guards walked by. She stopped nodding politely when Roxanne made threats. She just went through the motions like a robot programmed to survive. Wake up. Work. Deliver envelopes. Clean Frank's office. Sleep. Repeat. The days blurred together into one long gray nightmare where nothing mattered and nobody cared. But inside, something was changing. Ivy was paying attention now. Really paying attention. To the guards who took Frank's envelopes and smiled too wide. To the inmates who suddenly got extra phone time or better cell assignments. To the pattern of who got punished and who got protected. She was building a map in her head. And maps meant escape routes. Or revenge routes. She hadn't decided which yet. Frank's favors got bigger. Heavier. Scarier. It wasn't just envelopes anymore. Now he wanted her to pass messages during rec time. Stand guard while he met with certain inmates in the chapel. Once, he even made her clean a room in the basement that smelled like copper and bleach, a room she was pretty sure had been used for something terrible. Ivy didn't ask questions. She just did what she was told. But every task felt like another chain wrapped around her neck, pulling tighter, choking her slowly. And the worst part? Frank knew she hated it. He saw the fear in her eyes every time he gave her a new assignment. And he liked it. Control wasn't just about power for him. It was about watching people break. And Ivy was his favorite project. One night, Frank called her into his office after lights out. Ivy's stomach dropped the moment Officer Briggs unlocked her cell. Late-night meetings were never good. She followed Briggs through the empty hallways, her footsteps echoing off concrete walls, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. When she stepped into Frank's office, he was standing by the window, hands behind his back, staring out at the prison yard. He didn't turn around. "Close the door," he said quietly. Ivy closed it. The click of the lock felt like a gunshot. Frank finally turned to face her. His expression was calm. Too calm. "We have a problem," he said, "and you're going to help me fix it." The problem, Frank explained, was a guard named Officer Malloy. Malloy had been working at Westmoor for 15 years, longer than Frank had been warden. He was old school, strict, by the book, and recently, he'd started asking questions. Questions about missing supplies. Questions about inmates getting privileges they shouldn't have. Questions about why certain guards seemed to have more money than their salaries allowed. Frank paced as he talked, his voice low and controlled, but Ivy could hear the edge underneath. Malloy was getting too close, and if he kept digging, everything Frank had built would collapse. So Frank needed Malloy distracted, discredited, and Ivy was going to be the weapon he used to do it. Frank's plan was simple and disgusting. Ivy would plant evidence in Malloy's locker. A small bag of pills stolen from the infirmary. Then she'd report anonymously through the prison's tip line. Malloy would get investigated, suspended, fired, and Frank's operation would be safe. Ivy stared at him, her mouth dry, her hands shaking. "I can't do that," she whispered. "He's innocent." Frank smiled. Not the warm uncle smile. The real one. The one that showed his teeth. "Innocent doesn't matter in here, Ivy. Useful matters. And right now, you're only useful if you do what I say. If you don't, I'll make sure everyone knows you've been my informant from day one. Roxanne, Tasha, every inmate who already hates you. I'll tell them you're the reason their friends got transferred, their packages got searched, their visits got denied. And I'll step back and watch what happens." Ivy felt like the floor had been ripped out from under her. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Every choice was a trap. If she planted the evidence, an innocent man's life would be destroyed. If she refused, her own life would be destroyed. Either way, someone got hurt. And Frank knew it. He fed on it. He walked over to his desk, pulled out a small plastic bag with 3 white pills inside, and held it out to her. "Malloy's locker is in the South Wing guard station. 3rd row, 2nd from the left. Combination is on the sticky note inside this bag. You have 2 days." Ivy took the bag with trembling hands. Frank patted her shoulder. "Good girl," he said. "You're learning." The next 2 days were the longest of Ivy's life. She carried the bag of pills in her pocket like a bomb. Every time she walked past a guard, she was sure they could see it, sense it, know what she was planning. She barely ate, barely slept. She kept imagining Malloy's face when they found the drugs. His confusion, his anger, his life falling apart because of her. But she also imagined what would happen if she didn't do it. Roxanne's hands around her throat. Tasha's fists breaking her ribs. The entire prison turning on her like a pack of wolves. She was trapped. Completely, utterly trapped. And on the morning of the 2nd day, she made her choice. She walked into the South Wing guard station during shift change when the room was empty. She found Malloy's locker, and she opened it. Inside, the locker was neat, almost obsessively organized. A spare uniform hung on a hook. A framed photo of 2 kids, probably grandkids, sat on the top shelf. A thermos. A paperback novel. Normal things. Human things. Ivy stared at the photo for a long time. Those kids loved him, trusted him, and she was about to ruin him. Her hand shook as she pulled out the bag of pills. She held it over the locker, ready to drop it inside, ready to do what Frank wanted. But then she stopped. Something inside her, some small piece that hadn't been crushed yet, refused. She couldn't do it. She wouldn't. Not to an innocent man. Not to those kids in the photo. Not even to save herself. So she closed the locker, put the pills back in her pocket, and walked out. When she told Frank she couldn't do it, he didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He just nodded slowly, like he'd been expecting this. "I'm disappointed, Ivy," he said. "I really thought you were smarter than this." He picked up his phone and made a call. Ivy couldn't hear what he said, but she didn't need to. That night, during dinner, Roxanne walked up to Ivy's table and dumped her tray on the floor. "Warden says you're done being protected," Roxanne said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Which means you're mine now." The cafeteria went silent. Every inmate turned to stare, and Ivy knew, right then, that her life had just gotten so much worse. She'd stood up to Frank. She'd chosen the right thing, and now she was going to pay for it. The attacks started small. Someone tripped her in the hallway. Someone poured soap in her shampoo bottle. Someone hit her uniform, so she got written up for being out of dress code. But then they escalated. One morning, Ivy woke up to find her mattress slashed open, stuffing pulled out and scattered across the cell. Another day, someone cornered her in the bathroom and shoved her head into the sink until she thought she'd drown. Roxanne never did it herself. She didn't have to. She just gave the orders and watched from a distance, arms crossed, smiling. And every time Ivy looked at Frank during one of her cleaning shifts, he just shrugged. "This could all stop," he said. "You know what you have to do." But Ivy didn't break. Not this time. She took the hits, the threats, the isolation. She stopped sleeping at night and started sleeping during the day when there were more people around. She learned to move fast, keep her back to walls, never go anywhere alone. It was exhausting, painful, terrifying, but it was also something else. It was hers. For the first time since she'd arrived, Ivy was making her own choices. She wasn't Frank's puppet anymore. She wasn't Roxanne's victim. She was just a girl trying to survive on her own terms. And that, somehow, felt like power. Small, fragile, but real. And once you taste real power, even just a little bit, you can't go back to being powerless. You just can't. One night, lying on her slashed mattress, staring at the ceiling, Ivy made a decision. She wasn't going to wait for someone to save her. She wasn't going to hope things got better. She was going to take control. She was going to find proof of what Frank was doing and burn his whole operation to the ground. She didn't know how yet. She didn't have a plan. But she had something more important. She had rage. Cold, focused, patient. The kind of rage that doesn't scream. The kind that waits, watches, plans. And when the moment comes, strikes without mercy. Frank had created this. He'd pushed her too far. And now he was about to learn the most dangerous lesson of his life. Never back a quiet girl into a corner. Because when she finally fights back, she doesn't fight to win. She fights to destroy everything. Would you risk everything to expose the truth, even if it meant losing your life? Ivy already made her choice. And what happens next will leave you speechless. 3 months passed. 3 months of bruises and sleepless nights and learning to move through Westmoor like a ghost. Ivy stopped talking to anyone, stopped making eye contact. She became invisible again, just like she'd been in high school. But this time, it was a strategy. While everyone ignored her, she watched. She memorized guard schedules. She noticed which doors were left unlocked. She saw which inmates got visitors and which packages came through without being checked. She was building something, a plan, a weapon. She just needed one more piece. She needed proof, something concrete, something that would make people listen. And then, on a cold Tuesday morning, help arrived from the last place she expected. Her name was Nurse Elaine. She came to Westmoor as part of a new mental health initiative, some government program designed to look like they cared about inmates without actually changing anything. Elaine was older, maybe 50, with gray streaks in her dark hair and eyes that looked at people like they mattered. She set up a small office in the old chapel, the one place in Westmoor that still had windows with actual light coming through. She offered counseling sessions twice a week. Most inmates ignored her. They'd seen social workers before, people who showed up with smiles and promises, then disappeared the moment things got difficult. But Ivy was desperate. So when Elaine approached her during rec time and said, "Would you like to talk sometime?" Ivy nodded. Just once. But it was enough. Their first session was awkward. Ivy sat in the stiff wooden chair across from Elaine's desk and stared at her hands while Elaine asked gentle questions. "How are you adjusting? Do you feel safe here? Is there anything you need?" Ivy didn't answer most of them. She learned the hard way that trusting people in Westmoor was suicide. But Elaine didn't push. She just talked. About her own life. About her daughter who played violin. About how music had saved her during her own dark times. And when she mentioned music, Ivy's head lifted. "You play?" Elaine asked. Ivy's throat was tight. "I used to. Cello." Elaine smiled. "Then you still do? You just need an instrument." And that's when everything started to shift. Because Elaine wasn't like the others. She actually meant what she said. 2 weeks later, Elaine showed up to their session carrying a cello case. It was old, scratched, one of the strings was missing, and the bow looked like it had survived a war. But to Ivy, it was the most beautiful thing she'd seen in months. Her hands shook as she took it from Elaine. She ran her fingers over the wood, traced the curves, pressed her palm against the body like it was alive. "Where did you get this?" Ivy whispered. Elaine sat down. "Chapel storage. It's been there for years. Nobody wanted it, but I thought you might." Ivy couldn't speak. She just clutched the cello and felt something break open inside her chest. Something that had been locked away since the night Vincent died. Grief, relief, hope, all at once. And for the first time in months, Ivy cried. Not silent tears. Real, gasping, ugly sobs that shook her whole body. Elaine didn't try to comfort her. She just sat there, present, patient, waiting. After that, music became Ivy's lifeline. Every session with Elaine, she played. At first, her fingers were clumsy, stiff from months of manual labor and fear. But slowly, the muscle memory returned. The notes started flowing, and something incredible happened. Other inmates started listening. During rec time, when Ivy played in the chapel, women would gather near the doorway. Not saying anything, not moving, just listening. Even Roxanne showed up once, leaning against the wall with her arms crossed, face unreadable. When Ivy finished, Roxanne didn't say a word. She just walked away. But something had shifted. Music did what words couldn't. It reminded people that Ivy was human, that they all were. And for a brief moment, Westmoor felt a little less like hell. Elaine became more than a counselor. She became the mother Ivy never had. She brought books from outside. She told stories about the world beyond the walls. She asked Ivy about her dreams, her fears, her plans for when she got out. And slowly, carefully, Ivy started opening up. She told Elaine about Vincent, about the trial, about Frank's envelopes and Roxanne's threats and Jeannie's betrayal. She told her everything. And Elaine listened, really listened, not with judgment or pity, just with presence. "You're stronger than you think," Elaine said one afternoon. "You've survived things that would have broken most people. Don't let this place convince you otherwise." Ivy wanted to believe her. She wanted to hold onto those words like a shield. But deep down, she knew better. Westmoor didn't let people stay strong. It just hadn't finished breaking her yet. Then one morning, Elaine didn't show up for their session. Ivy waited in the chapel for an hour, cello in her lap, staring at the empty doorway. She told herself Elaine was just sick, or stuck in traffic, or dealing with paperwork. Normal reasons. Safe reasons. But when the second session got canceled, and then the third, Ivy knew something was wrong. She asked the guards. They shrugged. She asked other inmates. Nobody knew anything. And then, 5 days after Elaine disappeared, Officer Briggs pulled Ivy aside during lunch. His face was blank. Professional. The way guards looked when they were delivering bad news. "The counselor's not coming back," he said. "She had a heart attack. Died in her sleep." He walked away before Ivy could respond. Just turned and left her standing there, frozen, the cafeteria noise fading into white static. Ivy didn't believe it. Not for a second. Elaine was healthy, active. She jogged every morning before work. She talked about planning a hiking trip with her daughter. People like that don't just die in their sleep. But nobody else seemed suspicious. The other guards talked about it like it was sad but normal. The inmates shrugged it off. Death happened. Especially to people who got too close to inmates. Especially to people who asked too many questions. And that's when Ivy remembered something. 3 days before Elaine disappeared, Ivy had mentioned Frank during one of their sessions. She told Elaine about the envelopes, the threats, the way he controlled everything. Elaine had leaned forward, eyes sharp, and said, "That's not just unethical, Ivy. That's criminal. I need to report this." Ivy had begged her not to. Begged her to stay out of it. But Elaine had smiled and said, "Don't worry. I'll be careful." The next day, Ivy broke into the maintenance closet during her work shift and stole a flashlight. That night, after lights out, she waited until Roxanne was snoring, then slipped out of her cell. She learned which doors the guards left unlocked during night rounds. She moved through the dark hallways like smoke, heart pounding, every shadow a threat. She made it to Frank's office on the 3rd floor. The door was locked, but she'd watched Officer Kane punch in the code dozens of times. She tried it. The lock clicked. She stepped inside. The office was dark except for the moonlight coming through the barred window. Ivy turned on the flashlight and started searching. Files, desk drawers, the bookshelf. She didn't know what she was looking for. Just something, anything. Proof that Frank had killed Elaine. Proof that this place was rotten from the inside out. She found in the trash can a small pair of wire-rimmed glasses. Broken. One lens cracked. The frames bent. Ivy recognized them immediately. They were Elaine's. She'd worn them every single session, perched on the end of her nose while she took notes. Ivy picked them up with shaking hands and stared at them under the flashlight beam. Why would Elaine's glasses be in Frank's trash can? Why would they be broken? The official story was a heart attack at home, but these glasses told a different story. They told a story of violence, of struggle, of murder. Ivy's chest tightened. Her breath came in short gasps. She'd been right. Frank had killed her. He'd killed the one person who'd shown Ivy kindness. The one person who'd made her feel human again. And he'd done it to keep his secret safe. Ivy heard footsteps in the hallway. Heavy boots. A guard making rounds. She shoved the glasses in her pocket, turned off the flashlight, and dove behind Frank's desk. The door opened. Light flooded the room. Ivy held her breath, pressed flat against the floor, praying the darkness would hide her. The guard, who was Officer Briggs, walked in, looked around, then walked out. The door closed. Ivy waited 5 full minutes before moving. When she finally crawled out from behind the desk, her whole body was shaking. She'd almost been caught, almost been thrown in solitary. Or worse. But she had the glasses. She had proof. Now, she just needed to figure out what to do with it. Because showing anyone in Westmoor meant death. Frank controlled the guards. The guards controlled everything. There was no one to trust, no one to turn to. Ivy was completely alone. The next morning, Ivy went to the chapel during rec time. She sat in the corner where she usually played cello and just stared at the instrument. She thought about Elaine, about how she'd smiled when Ivy played, about how she'd said Ivy was strong, about how she died trying to help her. And something inside Ivy hardened. Not rage this time. Something colder. Determination. She wasn't going to let Elaine die for nothing. She was going to finish what Elaine started. She was going to expose Frank. Even if it killed her. Even if nobody believed her. Even if she destroyed herself in the process. Because some things were worth dying for. Justice. Truth. The memory of someone who'd cared. And Ivy Carter, the quiet girl who'd spent her whole life avoiding conflict, was about to start a war. She picked up the cello, placed the bow against the strings, and played the saddest, angriest, most beautiful song she'd ever created. The notes echoed through the chapel, through the hallways, through every cell in Westmoor. Inmates stopped what they were doing and listened. Guards paused mid-step. Even Frank, sitting in his office 3 floors above, heard it. And he knew. Somehow he knew. The music wasn't just music anymore. It was a declaration, a promise, a warning. Ivy Carter was done being used, done being silent, done being afraid. And whatever came next, whatever Frank tried to do to stop her, she wasn't backing down. Not this time. Not ever again. The war had just begun, and Frank had no idea what he'd created. If you've ever lost someone who believed in you, you know what Ivy felt in that moment. Subscribe so you don't miss how she makes them all pay. Ivy knew she couldn't expose Frank with just a pair of broken glasses. She needed more. She needed his voice, his words, proof that couldn't be ignored or explained away. So she started planning. During her work shifts in the laundry, she paid attention to what got thrown away. Broken radios, old phones, anything with electronics. Most of it was junk. But one afternoon, while sorting through a bin of confiscated items, she found it. A small digital voice recorder. The kind journalists used. The screen was cracked. The buttons were sticky. But when she pressed play, it worked. Static crackled through the tiny speaker. Ivy's heart raced. This was it. This was her weapon. She slipped it into her pocket and walked out of the laundry like nothing happened. The hard part was figuring out where to hide it. Her cell wasn't safe. Roxanne went through her stuff regularly, looking for contraband or just things to destroy for fun. The laundry room was too public. Too many cameras. Too many eyes. But then Ivy remembered the chapel. The old wooden pews had carvings underneath, hollow spaces where decades of inmates had hidden cigarettes, notes, small trinkets. She went there during rec time, found a pew in the back corner, and carved out a deeper space with a nail she'd stolen from maintenance. She wrapped the recorder in a plastic bag, shoved it inside, and covered it with a piece of which she'd shaped to fit perfectly. Nobody would find it, not unless they knew exactly where to look. And only Ivy knew. Now came the waiting. Frank didn't meet with people randomly. He had a schedule. Every Tuesday and Thursday night, after lockdown, he held meetings in his office. Guards, outside contacts, sometimes inmates who worked for him. Ivy had heard the rumors. She'd seen people get called up to his office late at night and come back with cigarettes, extra commissary, or special privileges. Frank ran Westmoor like a business. And business happened after dark. So Ivy waited for Tuesday. She told Roxanne she was sick, stayed in her cell during dinner, then pretended to fall asleep early. When the lights went out and Roxanne started snoring, Ivy slipped out again. Same route as before. Dark hallways. Unlocked doors. The code to Frank's office. Her hand shook as she punched it in. The office was empty. Ivy moved fast. She pulled the recorder from her pocket, checked the battery. It was half full, pressed record, and hid it behind the bookshelf. The shelf was heavy, wooden, pushed against the wall. Nobody would look there. Nobody would hear the soft whir of the recorder running. She made sure the red light was facing the wall, invisible unless you knew it was there. Then she slipped back out, locked the door behind her, and returned to her cell. Her heart pounded the entire way. She was sure someone would catch her. Sure a guard would appear around every corner. But nobody did. She made it back, climbed into her bunk, and lay there staring at the ceiling, too wired to sleep, too terrified to move. The recorder was running, and whatever Frank said tonight would be hers. 3 days later, Ivy went back. Same routine, same dark hallways, same code. She opened the door to Frank's office and froze. The bookshelf had been moved, just slightly, a few inches to the left. Ivy's blood went cold. Someone had found it. Someone knew. She stepped inside, expecting Frank to be waiting for her. Expecting guards. Handcuffs. Solitary. But the room was empty. She walked to the bookshelf and looked behind it. The recorder was still there. Untouched. Still running. Ivy exhaled so hard her knees almost buckled. She grabbed it, shoved it in her pocket, and got out of there as fast as she could. She didn't breathe normally until she was back in the chapel, sitting in her corner, hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the recorder steady. She pressed stop, then rewind, then play. Static crackled, then voices. Frank's voice. Clear, unmistakable. He was talking to someone, a man Ivy didn't recognize. They were discussing shipments, money, payoffs. Frank mentioned names, dates, amounts. He talked about Elaine. The counselor got too curious, Frank said. I had Torres handle it. Made it look natural. Heart attack. Nobody's asking questions. Ivy's chest tightened. She heard it. She actually heard him admit to murder. The man on the recording laughed. You're cold, Frank. I respect that. Frank's voice was calm. I do what's necessary. This place runs because I run it. And nobody, not guards, not inmates, not bleeding heart counselors, nobody stops that. The recording went on for another 10 minutes. More names, more crimes, more proof. When it finally ended, Ivy just sat there, staring at the recorder in her hands. She had him. She actually had him. But now what? She couldn't go to the guards. They all work for Frank. She couldn't mail it out. All outgoing mail got screened. She couldn't give it to another inmate. Nobody would risk their neck for her. She was trapped. Again, she had the most damning piece of evidence anyone could ask for, and absolutely no way to use it. Ivy wanted to scream, wanted to smash the recorder against the wall, wanted to give up. But then she thought about Elaine, about Jeannie, about every person Frank had hurt or used or destroyed. And she realized something. She didn't need to get the recording out. She just needed people to hear it. And there was one place in Westmoor where everyone gathered. One place where sound carried through every hallway, every cell, every corner of the building. The chapel. during Sunday service. Sunday service was mandatory. Every inmate, every guard, even Frank attended, sitting in the back with his arms crossed, playing the role of the reformed warden who believed in redemption. It was all performance, but it was also an opportunity. The chapel had an old PA system installed decades ago for sermons. It barely worked. The speakers crackled. The microphone buzzed, but it was loud. And if Ivy could connect the recorder to that system, everyone would hear Frank's confession. Every inmate, every guard, every person who'd ever believed his lies. It was risky, insane, probably suicidal, but it was also the only chance she had. So Ivy spent the next 3 days planning. She studied the PA system during rec time. She found cables in the maintenance closet. She tested connections when nobody was watching. And slowly, carefully, she built a plan. Sunday morning came. Ivy woke up before the alarm, stomach twisting in knots. This was it. If it worked, Frank was finished. If it didn't, she was dead. She got dressed, went to breakfast, moved through the motions like a robot. When the bell rang for service, she filed into the chapel with everyone else. Frank was already there, sitting in his usual spot, looking bored. The chaplain, a tired old man who read from the same script every week, stood at the podium and started his sermon. Ivy sat in the back row, the recorder in her pocket, cables hidden under her shirt. She waited, watched, and when the chaplain paused to take a drink of water, Ivy made her move. She stood up, walked to the PA system, and before anyone could stop her, she plugged in the recorder and pressed play. Static filled the chapel. Then Frank's voice. The counselor got too curious. I had Torres handle it. Made it look natural. Heart attack. Nobody's asking questions. The room went silent. Every head turned. Every eye locked on the speakers. Frank's face went white. He stood up, started moving toward Ivy, but it was too late. The recording kept playing. More confessions. More names. More crimes. Guards looked at each other, confused. Inmates started whispering. The chaplain backed away from the podium. And Ivy just stood there, hands at her sides, watching it all unfold. She didn't run, didn't hide. She just waited, because she knew what was coming next. And she was ready for it. She'd been ready for months. This was her moment. And nothing, not Frank, not the guards, not even death itself, was going to take it away from her. Frank reached her, grabbed her by the arm, ripped the cables out of the PA system. The recording stopped mid-sentence. But it didn't matter. Everyone had heard enough. The damage was done. Frank's grip was tight, painful. His face was red, veins bulging in his neck. You have no idea what you just did, he hissed. Ivy looked him in the eye, and for the first time since she'd arrived at Westmoor, she smiled. Not a scared smile, not a broken smile, a real one. I know exactly what I did, she said quietly. I told the truth. Frank's hand twitched like he wanted to hit her, but he couldn't. Not in front of everyone. Not with 200 witnesses watching. So he just dragged her out of the chapel, shouting orders at the guards, trying to regain control. But it was too late. The truth was out, and there was no putting it back. Have you ever stood up to someone who had all the power and none of the conscience? Have you ever risked everything just to do what was right? Ivy did, and what happened next changed everything. Don't miss the final act. They threw Ivy in solitary. No trial, no hearing, just Frank's word in a dark cell with no windows. The hole, inmates called it. A concrete box barely 6 feet wide. No bed, no toilet, just a bucket in the corner and a slot in the door where they shoved food twice a day. Ivy lost track of time almost immediately. Hours blurred into days, days into weeks. Maybe. She couldn't tell. The darkness pressed against her eyes like a weight. The silence rang in her ears until she heard sounds that weren't there. Voices, music, screaming. She tried to stay strong, tried to remember why she'd done it. But solitary does something to your mind. It breaks you in ways violence never could. And Ivy could feel herself cracking. 3 weeks in, maybe 4, the door opened. Light flooded in, so bright Ivy had to cover her eyes. When she could finally see, Frank was standing there. He looked different, tired, older, like the weight of his lies had finally caught up to him. 2 guards stood behind him, hands on their belts, ready for anything. Frank stepped inside. The door closed behind him. Just the two of them. Ivy pressed herself against the wall, heart pounding. She hadn't seen another person in weeks. Hadn't heard a voice other than her own. And now Frank was here. The man she'd exposed. The man who'd killed Elaine. Standing 3 feet away. She didn't know whether to scream or cry or just shut down completely. So she did nothing. Just stared. Frank didn't yell. Didn't threaten. He just looked at her with something that might have been pity. You really thought you could win, didn't you? He said quietly. You thought playing the recording would change something. That people would care. He shook his head. Nobody cares, Ivy. The guards still work for me. The inmates still need me. And the people on the outside? They'll believe whatever story I tell them. You're just one girl. One voice. And voices like yours disappear every single day. He pulled something from his pocket. A small flash drive. He held it up so she could see it. This is everything. Every recording you made. Every piece of evidence you thought you had. I had it all backed up. Edited. Ready to use against you if I needed to. Ivy's stomach dropped. She stared at the flash drive, her mind racing. How'd he know? How'd he get it? She'd been so careful. So precise. But Frank just smiled. You really think you were the first person to try this? You think I've survived this long by being careless? He crouched down so he was eye level with her. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to stay in this hole for another month. Maybe 2. Long enough for everyone to forget about you. And when you get out, you're going to keep your mouth shut. You're going to finish your sentence. And you're going to leave Westmoor without saying another word. Because if you don't, I'll release this. He waved the flash drive. And it doesn't make me look bad, Ivy. It makes you look like a liar. A manipulator. A girl who'd do anything for attention. He stood up, walked to the door, knocked twice. The guards opened it. Light spilled in again. Frank looked back at her one last time. You were never going to win, he said. You were just entertainment. Then he left. The door slammed shut. Darkness swallowed everything. And Ivy sat there, knees pulled to her chest, realizing the truth. She hadn't destroyed Frank. She'd only made him more careful, more dangerous. The recording hadn't changed anything. The inmates still feared him. The guards still obeyed him. And she was still trapped, still alone, still losing. She wanted to give up, wanted to curl into a ball and disappear. But something stopped her. A memory. Elaine's voice. You're stronger than you think. And Ivy realized something. Frank had one weakness. His arrogance. He thought he'd won. And that meant he'd stop watching her so closely. And that was exactly what she needed. For weeks later, they let her out of solitary. Ivy walked back into the general population like a ghost. Pale, thin, eyes sunken. Inmates stared at her like she was already dead. Nobody talked to her. Nobody sat near her. She was radioactive, toxic, the girl who tried to take down the warden and failed. But Ivy didn't care about their opinions anymore. She had one mission left, one final move. And this time, she wasn't going to announce it. Wasn't going to give Frank a chance to stop her. She was going to be patient, silent, invisible, just like she'd always been. And when a moment came, she'd strike so fast he wouldn't see it coming. Because Frank had made one critical mistake. He'd left her alive. And as long as she was breathing, the war wasn't over. The opportunity came 2 months later. A prison inspection. The state sent a team to investigate after anonymous complaints about conditions at Westmoor. Frank put on a show, cleaned up the place, coached the guards, even had inmates practice fake smiles and rehearse responses. He wanted everything to look perfect, legitimate, and to sell the illusion, he decided to showcase rehabilitation. He told the inspection team about Ivy, the girl with the cello, the talented musician who'd turned her life around. He wanted her to play for them, to prove that Westmoor changed lives instead of destroying them. It was the ultimate insult, using her as propaganda after everything he'd done. But Ivy didn't refuse. She agreed, because she knew something Frank didn't. This was her last chance, and she wasn't going to waste it. The performance was scheduled for a Friday afternoon in the chapel. The inspection team sat in the front row. 3 men in suits, clipboards, pens, bored expressions. Frank stood off to the side, arms crossed, smiling like a proud principal at a school recital. Guards lined the walls. Inmates filled the pews. Everyone was watching, waiting, Ivy walked to the center of the room, carrying the old cello Elaine had given her. She sat down, adjusted the bow, took a breath, and then she started to play. The music was soft at first, gentle, beautiful, the kind of melody that made people close their eyes and forget where they were. The inspection team relaxed. Frank's smile widened. Everything was going exactly as planned. And then Ivy changed the song. The notes turned sharp, dissonant, angry. The bow scraped across the strings like nails on glass. It wasn't music anymore. It was noise, chaos, a scream without words. People shifted uncomfortably. The inspection team looked confused. Frank's smile disappeared. He started moving toward her. But Ivy didn't stop. She played louder, faster. And then, in the middle of the chaos, she started talking. Not singing. Talking. Over the music. He killed her, Ivy said. Her voice was calm, clear, cutting through the noise. Warden Frank killed Nurse Elaine because she was going to report him. He runs this place like a crime ring. Payoffs, threats, murder, and everyone here knows it. But nobody says anything because they're too scared. I'm not scared anymore. She stopped playing. The silence was deafening. Every eye in the room was on her. Frank was halfway to her, face red, veins bulging. But he couldn't do anything. Not in front of the inspection team. Not in front of witnesses. One of the inspectors stood up. Is this true? He asked, looking at Frank. Frank laughed. Forced. Tight. She's mentally unstable. Solitary does that sometimes. She's been making wild accusations for months. The inspector turned to Ivy. Do you have proof? Ivy reached into her shirt and pulled out a small piece of paper. She'd been carrying it for weeks, waiting for this exact moment. It was a photocopy of Elaine's broken glasses. She'd taken it the night she found them, hidden it in the chapel, and now she handed it to the inspector. Those are Nurse Elaine's glasses. I found them in Warden Frank's office trash can, 3 days after she died. The official report said she died at home from a heart attack. So why were her broken glasses in his office? The inspector stared at the photo, then at Frank. We're going to need to investigate this, he said slowly. Frank lunged. He grabbed Ivy by the throat and shoved her against the wall. Guards rushed forward but froze when the inspector shouted, Let her go. Now. Frank's hand was tight. Ivy couldn't breathe, couldn't move. She stared into his eyes and saw something she'd never seen before. Fear. Real fear. He knew he was finished. The inspectors had seen him lose control, seen him attack an inmate in front of witnesses. Everything he'd built, every lie he'd told, it was crumbling. And he knew it. Slowly, he let go. Ivy collapsed to the floor, gasping. Frank stepped back. Hands up. This is a misunderstanding, he said. But nobody was listening anymore. The inspectors were already making calls. Guards were backing away from Frank. And inmates were whispering, louder now, braver. The king was falling. And everyone wanted to watch. Roxanne stepped forward. Ivy looked up, expecting another attack. But Roxanne wasn't looking at her. She was looking at Frank. He's right about one thing, Roxanne said. We were all too scared to talk. But if she's brave enough to say it, then so am I. Frank's been running drugs, taking bribes, and hurting anyone who gets in his way for years. I've seen it. We've all seen it. Other inmates started nodding, murmuring agreement. Even some guards looked uncomfortable. The walls were closing in. Frank turned to leave, but the inspectors blocked his path. You're not going anywhere, one of them said. We're putting this facility on lockdown until we get answers. Frank's face went pale. He looked at Ivy one last time, and she smiled. Not out of cruelty, out of relief. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. The truth was finally out. And this time, nobody could bury it. That night, Ivy sat in her cell and cried. Not sad tears. Exhausted ones. She'd fought for so long. Lost so much. Elaine. Jeannie. Her innocence. Her hope. But she'd also won something. Justice. Not perfect justice. Not the kind that brings people back or erases pain. But the kind that says, this mattered. You mattered. And for Ivy Carter, that was enough. She picked up her cello and played one last song. Soft. Gentle. A lullaby for all the broken girls who'd never gotten a fight back. For Elaine. For herself. And when the final note faded, Ivy closed her eyes and whispered, I kept my promise. When someone tries to erase you, what's the one thing you'd fight to protect? Your voice, your truth? Ivy protected both, and it cost her everything. 3 months passed after Frank's arrest. 3 months of investigations, interviews, and reporters camping outside Westmoor's gates. The story exploded. National news, documentaries. Everyone wanted to know about the girl who took down a corrupt warden with nothing but a cello and the truth. Ivy became famous overnight, but fame in prison is dangerous. Some inmates treated her like a hero. Others hated her for bringing more scrutiny to Westmoor. More guards, more rules, more lockdowns. Ivy didn't care about any of it. She just wanted to finish her sentence and leave. She had 2 years left. 2 more years in this concrete hell. But at least now she could breathe. At least now she wasn't Frank's puppet. She was just herself. And that felt like freedom. The new warden was a woman named Warden Stokes. Strict but fair. She cleaned house immediately. Fired half the guards. Brought in new staff. Opened real counseling programs. Improved the food. Fixed broken windows. It wasn't paradise, but it was better. Livable. And for the first time since arriving, Ivy felt like maybe she could survive this. Maybe she could make it to the other side. She kept playing cello. Kept attending her sessions with a new counselor. Kept her head down and her heart protected. She didn't make friends. Didn't trust anyone. She'd learned that lesson too many times. But she was okay with being alone. Alone meant safe. And safe was all she had left. Then one afternoon, during rec time, Roxanne approached her. Ivy tensed immediately. Roxanne hadn't bothered her since Frank's arrest, but that didn't mean she'd forgotten. Roxanne sat down next to her on the bench outside the chapel. Didn't say anything at first, just stared out at the yard. Finally, she spoke. "I owe you an apology," Roxanne said. Her voice was quiet, almost unrecognizable without the usual edge. Ivy didn't respond, didn't even look at her. Roxanne continued. "I made your life hell because Frank told me to. And I did it because it was easier than standing up to him. You were braver than all of us. And I hated you for it. But I shouldn't have. So I'm sorry." She stood up and walked away before Ivy could say anything. And Ivy just sat there, stunned. She didn't forgive Roxanne. Not completely. But she understood her. And maybe that was enough. The day of the final performance came 6 months after Frank's arrest. The state wanted to show that Westmoor was reformed. That rehabilitation actually worked. So they organized a big event. Families, press, politicians, and they wanted Ivy to play. The girl who changed everything. The symbol of hope. Ivy didn't want to do it. She hated being a symbol. Hated the cameras and the fake smiles and the way people looked at her like she was inspiration instead of just a person trying to survive. But Warden Stokes asked her personally. "This could help other girls like you," Stokes said. "Girls who think they don't have a voice. You could show them they do." And Ivy couldn't say no to that. So she agreed. One final performance. One last time standing in front of everyone. Then she'd disappear into her sentence and wait for freedom. The chapel was packed. Rows of folding chairs filled with visitors. Inmates in the back. Guards along the walls. Cameras in the corners. Ivy walked to the center, holding her cello. The room went silent. She sat down, adjusted the bow, and looked out at the crowd. Her hands were shaking. She tried to steady them, but couldn't. This was supposed to be her moment. Her victory, but all she felt was exhausted. Tired of fighting. Tired of being strong. Tired of carrying the weight of everyone's expectations. She closed her eyes and thought about Elaine. About the first time she'd played in this chapel. About how music used to make her feel free. She wanted that feeling again. Just once. So she took a deep breath and played. The music started soft. A melody she'd written during her time in solitary. It was sad, haunting. Every note carried the weight of everything she'd lost. Vincent, her mother, Jeannie, Elaine, her childhood, her innocence. The bow moved across the strings like it was crying. People in the audience started wiping their eyes. Even some guards looked uncomfortable. Ivy poured everything into the music. Every emotion she'd buried. Every scream she'd swallowed. Every tear she'd hidden. The cello became her voice. And for the first time in years, she felt like maybe someone was actually listening. Really listening. Not to the story. Not to the headlines, but to her, the real her, the broken, scared, angry, hopeful girl underneath all the armor. Halfway through the song, Ivy opened her eyes, and she saw him, standing in the back, near the door. Officer Torres, the guard who'd killed Elaine, the one Frank had mentioned on the recording. He was supposed to be fired, arrested, gone, but there he was, in uniform, watching her. Their eyes met, and Torres smiled, not a friendly smile, a warning. Ivy's hands faltered, the music stuttered. She recovered quickly, but her heart was racing. Why was he here? How was he still free? She looked toward Warden Stokes, but Stokes was watching the performance, unaware. Ivy's mind raced. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. But she couldn't stop playing. Couldn't make a scene. Not in front of all these people. So she kept going. Bow moving. Notes flowing. Eyes locked on Torres. And he just stood there, smiling, waiting. When the song ended, the room erupted in applause. Standing ovation. Cameras flashing. People wiping tears. Ivy stood up, bowed slightly, and immediately looked for Torres. But he was gone. She scanned the crowd. The doorway. The corners. Nothing. He'd disappeared. Ivy's stomach twisted. She walked off stage as quickly as she could without running. People tried to stop her, congratulate her, shake her hand. But she pushed past them all. She needed to find Warden Stokes. Needed to tell someone that Torres was here. That he shouldn't be here. That something was happening. She made it to the hallway outside the chapel, turned the corner, and ran straight into someone. Officer Briggs. He grabbed her arms to steady her. Whoa, slow down, he said. You okay? Ivy pulled away. Torres is here, she said breathlessly. I saw him. In the chapel. Briggs frowned. Torres? He got fired months ago. You must have seen someone who looks like him. But Ivy knew what she saw. She pushed past Briggs and ran toward the chapel doors. She burst back inside. The event was wrapping up. People gathering their things. Inmates being escorted back to their cells. And there, talking to Warden Stokes near the front, was Torres. In uniform. Casual. Like he belonged there. Ivy's blood ran cold. She walked toward them. Stokes saw her coming and smiled. Ivy, that was beautiful. Truly moving. Ivy ignored her. She stared at Torres. Why is he here? She demanded. Stokes looked confused. This is Officer Mendez. He transferred here last month from upstate. Have you two not met? Ivy's mind went blank. Mendez? Not Torres. She looked closer. The face was similar. Same build. Same cold eyes. But it wasn't him. She'd been wrong. Paranoid. Broken by months of trauma. She felt her face flush with embarrassment. I'm sorry, she mumbled. I thought you were someone else. She turned and walked away before anyone could ask more questions. That night, Ivy couldn't sleep. She lay in her bunk staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment over and over. She'd been so sure it was Torres. So certain. But she'd been wrong. And now she looked crazy. Unstable. Everything Frank had accused her of being. Maybe he was right. Maybe solitary had broken something inside her. Maybe she was seeing threats that didn't exist. She closed her eyes and tried to push the thoughts away. But then she heard it. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Coming down the hallway outside her cell. Ivy's eyes snapped open. It was past midnight. Nobody walked the halls this late except guards doing rounds. But these footsteps were different. Quieter. Like someone trying not to be heard. Ivy sat up. Listened. The footsteps stopped outside her cell. She heard breathing. Then a voice. Soft. Familiar. You should have stayed quiet, Ivy. Her blood turned to ice. That voice. She knew that voice. It was Torres. The cell door opened. Not unlocked. Just opened. Like someone had the key. Torres stepped inside. He was wearing regular clothes now. No uniform. No badge. Just jeans and a black jacket. He closed the door behind him. Ivy scrambled back against the wall. How did you get in here? She whispered. Torres smiled. Same way I always did. Friends in low places. Frank's gone, but his network isn't. And a lot of people lost money when you opened your mouth. They want payback. I volunteered. He pulled something from his jacket. A knife. Small. Sharp. The kind you could hide easily. Ivy's heart pounded so hard she thought it would burst. You're going to kill me, she said. Not a question. A fact. Torres shrugged. Nothing personal. Just business. Frank paid me well. And the people replacing him pay even better. You're a loose end. And loose ends get cut. Ivy looked around for a weapon. Anything. But there was nothing. Just a thin mattress. A pillow. A bucket. Roxanne was still asleep in the bunk below, snoring softly, completely unaware. Ivy could scream, wake everyone up, but Torres would kill her before help arrived. She knew that, so she did the only thing she could think of. She talked. You're scared, she said. Torres laughed. Of you? A skinny girl with a cello? Ivy shook her head. Not of me. Of what I represent. Of the truth. You killed Elaine. And now everyone knows. Killing me won't change that. It'll just prove I was right. Torres stepped closer. The knife glinted in the dim light. I don't care about right. I care about surviving. And you're a threat to my survival. So you've got to go. He lunged. Ivy rolled off the bunk and hit the floor hard. The knife missed her by inches. Roxanne woke up with a shout. What the hell? Torres turned toward her. Ivy didn't think. She just moved. She grabbed the bucket from the corner and swung it as hard as she could. It connected with Torres's head with a loud clang. He stumbled, dropped the knife. Ivy scrambled for it. Her hands closed around the handle. He grabbed her wrist. They struggled. He was stronger, so much stronger. He twisted her arm until she cried out and dropped the knife. Then he shoved her against the wall. His hands closed around her throat. Ivy couldn't breathe, couldn't scream. She clawed at his hands, but he didn't let go. Her vision started going dark. She thought about Elaine, about her mother, about Vincent, about all the ways she'd fought to survive just to die like this. Alone, forgotten, and she felt herself letting go. Then Roxanne was there. She grabbed Torres from behind and pulled him off Ivy. Torres spun and punched Roxanne in the face. She went down hard, but it gave Ivy enough time to grab the knife again. When Torres came at her, she didn't hesitate. She drove the knife into his side. Not deep, just enough to stop him. Torres gasped, stumbled back. Blood spread across his shirt. He looked at Ivy with shock, like he couldn't believe the quiet girl had actually fought back. Then he collapsed. Guards burst through the door seconds later. Alarms blaring, lights flashing. They saw Torres on the floor, saw the knife in Ivy's hand, saw the blood, and they tackled her, pinned her down. Handcuffs, shouting, chaos. Ivy didn't fight. She just lay there, exhausted, broken, and wondering if she'd ever actually be free, or if this place would just keep taking and taking until there was nothing left. They took her to solitary again. Same dark cell, same bucket, same silence. But this time felt different, heavier, because Ivy knew the truth now. She'd won the battle against Frank, but the war wasn't over. His network was still out there, still hunting her, and she'd just given them more ammunition. Self-defense or not, she'd stabbed a man. She'd brought more violence into a place that was supposed to be about rehabilitation. The headlines would destroy her. The public would turn on her. And everything she'd fought for would be forgotten. She sat in the darkness and realized something terrible. Sometimes doing the right thing doesn't save you. Sometimes it just makes you a target for everyone else who's wrong. And maybe, just maybe, there was no happy ending for girls like her. Just survival. And even that wasn't guaranteed anymore. If you had to choose between staying silent and staying alive, or speaking up and risking everything, what would you do? And it might have just cost her everything she had left. Ivy spent 6 weeks in solitary. 6 weeks of investigation while they tried to piece together what happened that night. Torres survived. The knife wound wasn't deep enough to kill him, just enough to stop him. He claimed he'd been doing a routine cell check when Ivy attacked him without warning. He said she was unstable, dangerous, that she'd been planning this since Frank's arrest. And a lot of people believed him, because Torres had friends, other corrupt guards who vouched for him, inmates who owed him favors, even some of the new staff who didn't know better. It was his word against hers. And Ivy had already been labeled a troublemaker, a girl who accused people of crimes, who caused chaos, who couldn't be trusted. But then something unexpected happened. Roxanne came forward. She told the investigators everything. How Torres had broken into their cell, how he'd attacked Ivy first, how Ivy had only fought back to survive. Roxanne had no reason to lie, no reason to protect Ivy. They weren't friends, weren't allies, but Roxanne told the truth anyway. And when the investigators pressed her, asking why she was defending someone she tormented for months, Roxanne just said, "Because I'm tired of watching innocent people get destroyed while guilty people walk free. If that girl had the guts to stand up to Frank, the least I can do is stand up for her." The investigators checked Torres's background more carefully after that, found inconsistencies, found evidence he'd been in the prison that night without authorization, found messages on his phone linking him to Frank's old network. And slowly, the case against Ivy crumbled. They released her from solitary on a Tuesday morning. No apology, no explanation, just a guard unlocking the door and saying, "You're cleared. Get your stuff." Ivy walked back into the general population feeling like a different person. Thinner, quieter, older. The other inmates looked at her with something new in their eyes. Not fear, not hatred, respect, maybe even awe. She'd survived Frank. She'd survived Torres. She'd survived solitary twice. And she was still standing. That meant something in a place like Westmoor. It meant she was tougher than she looked, stronger than anyone expected. And people started treating her differently because of it. They nodded when she walked by, gave her space in the cafeteria, stopped messing with her stuff. Ivy didn't want respect. She just wanted peace. But she'd take what she could get. Torres got arrested 3 days later. Real charges this time. Attempted murder, conspiracy, corruption. He was taken out of Westmoor in handcuffs while inmates cheered from their cells. Ivy watched from the window in the library. She didn't cheer, didn't smile. She just watched until the police car disappeared down the road. And then she went back to her book. Because that's all she could do. Keep moving forward. Keep surviving. One day at a time. The media tried to contact her again. Wanted interviews. Wanted her story. But Warden Stokes blocked it all. She served her purpose as your headline, Stokes told the reporters. Now let her serve her time in peace. And for once, someone with power actually protected Ivy instead of using her. It felt strange, almost uncomfortable, but also like maybe things were finally changing. 1 month after Torres's arrest, a lawyer showed up at Westmoor asking to see Ivy. His name was Bennett, mid-40s, gray suit, kind eyes. He worked for a nonprofit that helped wrongfully convicted people get their cases reviewed. He'd been following Ivy's story since Frank's arrest, and he believed her original conviction was wrong. "You were 17, Bennett said during their first meeting. "You were defending yourself and your mother from an abusive man. That's textbook self-defense. But your lawyer was overworked and underpaid. He didn't fight hard enough, didn't present the right evidence. And the jury convicted you based on emotion, not facts. I think we can overturn this. Get you out of here early. Maybe even get your record cleared." Ivy stared at him. She wanted to believe him, wanted to hope. But hope had burned her too many times. Still, she nodded. "Okay," she said quietly. "Let's try." The appeals process took 8 months. 8 months of paperwork and court dates and testimonies. Ivy's mother was contacted. She refused to participate, refused to speak on Ivy's behalf. That hurt more than Ivy expected. After everything, her mother still couldn't forgive her. Still couldn't admit that Vincent had been the monster, not Ivy. But Bennett didn't give up. He found witnesses, neighbors who'd heard the fights, teachers who'd seen the bruises. Even Ivy's old cello instructor testified, talking about how Ivy had been terrified to go home some days. The prosecution fought back hard. They didn't want to admit they'd convicted an innocent girl. Didn't want to look incompetent. But the evidence was overwhelming. And finally, on a cold January morning, the judge made his ruling. The conviction is overturned. The defendant is to be released immediately. Ivy sat in the courtroom and cried. Real tears. The kind that came from somewhere so deep she didn't know it existed. They released her 2 days later, January 15th, 3 years after she'd first walked through Westmoor's gates. Ivy stood outside the prison with a small bag of belongings, wearing clothes that didn't quite fit, staring at the road that led away from this place. Bennett was there. So was Warden Stokes. Even Roxanne stood near the fence, watching through the chain link. "You did good, kid," Roxanne called out. Ivy looked at her. Their eyes met. And Ivy nodded. Just once. No words needed. Then she turned to Bennett. What now? She asked. Bennett smiled. Now you get to decide. You're free, Ivy. Actually free. You can go anywhere. Do anything. Be anyone. The world's yours. Ivy took a deep breath. The air outside Westmoor tasted different. Cleaner. Lighter. Like maybe she could finally breathe again. But freedom was harder than Ivy expected. She had no home. No family. No job. No money. Bennett helped her get into a halfway house in the city. A small room. Share bathroom. Strict rules. But it was hers. And that was enough. She got a job washing dishes at a diner. It wasn't glamorous. The pay was terrible, but it was honest work. And after 3 years of being controlled by guards and wardens and corruption, honest work felt like a gift. She kept her head down, stayed quiet, avoided people who asked too many questions. She didn't want to be the cello girl anymore. Didn't want to be a symbol or a headline. She just wanted to be Ivy. And slowly, carefully, she started building a life that felt like her own. 6 months after her release, Ivy got a letter. No return address. Just her name on the envelope. Inside was a newspaper clipping. An article about Frank. He'd been convicted on multiple charges. Racketeering, corruption, murder. He got 40 years. No parole. The article included a quote from the prosecutor. This case wouldn't have been possible without the courage of one young woman who refused to stay silent. Ivy stared at the article for a long time. Then she folded it up and put it in a drawer. She didn't need validation from newspapers. Didn't need the world to tell her she'd done the right thing. She already knew. Because Elaine's death hadn't been for nothing. Because other girls in Westmoor were safer now. Because sometimes doing the right thing doesn't give you a happy ending. It just gives you peace. And for Ivy, that was enough. The letter also included a note. Handwritten. Short. You changed my life. Thank you. R. Ivy knew immediately who it was from. Roxanne. She smiled. A real smile. The kind she hadn't felt in years. She thought about writing back. Thought about reaching out. But she didn't. Some connections were meant to stay in the past. Some people came into your life to teach you lessons, not to stay forever. And Roxanne had taught Ivy the most important lesson of all. That people could change. That redemption was possible. Even in the darkest places. Even for the worst people. If they chose it. If they fought for it. Just like Ivy had. And that knowledge, that tiny seed of hope, was what finally let Ivy start healing. Really healing. Not just surviving. Actually living. 1 year after her release, Ivy bought a cello. Not the old one from Westmoor. A new one. She found it in a pawn shop. Scratched. Worn. But beautiful. She took it back to her tiny apartment and played for hours. The music poured out of her like a dam breaking. Everything she'd held back. Everything she'd survived. Every loss. Every victory. Every moment of pain and hope and rage and forgiveness. She played until her fingers bled. Until her arms ached. Until there was nothing left inside her but peace. And when she finally stopped, she sat in the silence and realized something. She made it. She'd actually made it. She'd survived hell. Fought monsters. Lost everything. And still found a way to keep going. That was her story. Not the headlines. Not the media narrative. Just a girl who refused to give up. Even when giving up would have been easier. Even when everyone told her she was broken. She kept fighting. And that made her a warrior. Not a victim. A warrior. And warriors didn't need happy endings. They just needed to know they'd fought for something that mattered. And Ivy had. Have you ever wondered if the fight is worth it when nobody's watching anymore? When there are no cameras, no applause, just you and the choice to keep going. That's real strength. That's Ivy's legacy. Not the takedown. The getting back up. 2 years after her release, Ivy got invited to speak at a youth detention center. At first, she said no. She didn't want to relive her story. Didn't want to be paraded around as some kind of cautionary tale or inspiration. But then she thought about herself at 17. Scared. Alone. Convinced nobody would ever believe her. And she realized that maybe one girl in that audience needed to hear that she wasn't alone. That survival was possible. That fighting back wasn't always wrong. So Ivy said yes. She showed up on a Saturday morning with her cello and a speech she'd written the night before. Her hands shook the entire drive there. But she went anyway, because that's what survivors do. They show up even when it's terrifying. The detention center looked like a smaller version of Westmoor. Same gray walls, same chain-link fences, same tired eyes watching from windows. Ivy walked into the common room where 30 girls sat in plastic chairs, arms crossed, faces hard. They'd been forced to attend mandatory assembly. Most of them didn't want to be there, didn't care about some stranger's story. But Ivy didn't blame them. She'd been the same way once. Defensive, closed off, building walls so high nobody could climb them. She sat down in the front of the room, pulled out her cello, and instead of starting with words, she started with music. Soft, sad, the kind of melody that spoke directly to broken hearts. And slowly, the girls stopped fidgeting, stopped whispering. They just listened. When the song ended, Ivy sat down the bow and looked at them. "My name is Ivy," she said, "and when I was 17, I killed my stepfather." The room went silent. Every eye locked on her. She had their attention now. "I didn't plan it. I didn't want it. He was hurting my mom, and I grabbed the first thing I could find and I stopped him. Permanently. And for that, I went to prison. I spent 3 years in a place that tried to break me every single day. Guards who used me. Inmates who hurt me. A system that didn't care if I lived or died. But I survived. And I'm here to tell you that no matter what you've done, no matter how bad things are right now, you can survive too. You just have to decide that your story doesn't end here." One girl in the back raised her hand. She looked about 16. Bruises on her arms. Eyes that had seen too much. "What if nobody believes you?" she asked. "What if you tell the truth and they still call you a liar?" Ivy nodded. She understood that question in her bones. "Then you keep telling the truth anyway," Ivy said. "Not for them. For you. Because the truth is the only thing they can't take from you. They can lock you up. They can hurt you. They could try to erase you. But if you hold on to the truth, if you refuse to let them rewrite your story, then you still have power. Maybe not the kind that gets you out immediately, but the kind that keeps you alive until you can get yourself out. And that's the power that matters most." Another girl spoke up. Younger. Maybe 14. "How do you stop being angry?" she asked. Her voice was small, fragile, like she was afraid of the answer. Ivy thought about that for a long moment. Thought about all the rage she'd carried for years. The kind that burned so hot it almost consumed her. "You don't," Ivy said honestly. "At least I haven't. I'm still angry. Angry at my mom for not protecting me. Angry at the system that failed me. Angry at everyone who used me and threw me away. But I learned to use that anger differently. Instead of letting it destroy me, I let it fuel me. I let it push me to fight, to survive, to become someone stronger than the girl they tried to break. Anger isn't bad. It's just energy, and you get to decide what you do with it." The girls asked more questions. About prison, about Frank, about how she got through the worst days. Ivy answered all of them, honestly, without sugarcoating, without pretending it was easy or that she had all the answers. She told them about the nights she wanted to give up, about the times she felt so alone she couldn't breathe, about the scars that still hadn't healed. But she also told them about the moments that saved her. Elaine's kindness, music, the choice to keep fighting even when fighting seemed pointless. And by the end, some of the girls were crying. Not because the story was sad, but because someone finally understood. Someone had walked through the fire and came out the other side. And if Ivy could do it, maybe they could too. After the talk, a girl approached Ivy. She was quiet, kept her eyes down. Her hands trembled as she spoke. "I hurt someone," she whispered. "I didn't mean to, but I did. And now everyone looks at me like I'm a monster, like I don't deserve a second chance." Ivy's chest tightened. She saw herself in this girl. The same fear, the same shame, the same desperate need for someone to say it was going to be okay. Ivy reached out and gently lifted the girl's chin so they were eye to eye. "Listen to me," Ivy said. "You made a mistake. A terrible, painful mistake. But mistakes don't define you. What you do after, that's what defines you. Do you give up? Or do you learn? Do you let guilt destroy you? Or do you use it to become someone better? You get to choose. Every single day, you get to choose." The girl nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered. And Ivy hugged her. Something she rarely did. Something she'd learned to avoid because touch meant vulnerability and vulnerability meant danger. But in that moment, she let herself be vulnerable. Let herself be human. Because this girl needed it. And maybe Ivy needed it too. When they pulled apart, the girl smiled. Small, fragile, but real. And Ivy knew, right then, that this was why she'd come. Not for the applause, not for the recognition, but for this. One girl, one moment, one chance to say, you're not alone, and you're going to make it. That was worth everything. On the drive home, Ivy thought about her mother. She hadn't spoken to her in over 3 years. Not since the trial. Part of her wanted to reach out, to try one more time, to ask why. Why didn't you protect me? Why didn't you believe me? Why did you choose him over me? But another part of her, the part that had survived Westmoor, knew the answer didn't matter anymore. Her mother had made her choice, and Ivy had made hers. She'd chosen to survive, to fight, to heal, and she couldn't do that while waiting for someone who would never apologize. So she let it go. Not forgiveness, just release. The kind that said, I'm done carrying your weight. I'm done waiting for you to save me. I saved myself, and that's enough. That night, Ivy played her cello in her apartment. No audience, no cameras, just her and the music. She played the song she'd written in Westmoor, the one full of pain and anger and loss. But this time, she added something new. Hope, not the naive kind, the earned kind, the kind that came from surviving the unsurvivable and choosing to keep going anyway. The notes filled her small apartment, echoed off the walls, and for the first time in years, Ivy felt something she thought she'd lost forever. Peace, not happiness, not joy, just peace. The quiet, steady knowledge that she was going to be okay, that she'd fought for her life and won, that she'd told her truth and survived. And that was more than enough. 3 years after her release, Ivy opened a small music school. Nothing fancy, just a rented space in a rough neighborhood with a few used instruments and a dream. She called it the Elaine Project, in memory of the woman who'd shown her that kindness still existed, that people could care without wanting something in return. The school offered free lessons to kids who couldn't afford them, kids from broken homes, kids in foster care, kids who'd made mistakes and were trying to rebuild. Ivy taught them cello, piano, guitar, whatever they wanted to learn. But more than that, she taught them something else, that their past didn't have to be their future, that they deserved second chances. That survival was just the beginning. Healing was possible, and music could be the bridge between the two. The school grew. Slowly. Word spread. More kids showed up. Some were quiet like Ivy had been. Others were loud and angry and defensive. But all of them were hurting, and Ivy knew how to speak to hurt. She didn't lecture, didn't preach. She just listened. And when they were ready, she shared her story. Not as inspiration, just as proof. Proof that you could fall apart and put yourself back together. Proof that the world might try to break you, but it didn't have to succeed. Proof that even when nobody believed you, even when nobody saved you, you could save yourself. And that was the most powerful lesson of all. Self-rescue. The kind nobody could take away. The kind that lasted forever. One afternoon, 5 years after her release, Ivy was teaching a class when she noticed a woman standing in the doorway. Older, gray hair, tired eyes. It took Ivy a moment to recognize her. And when she did, her hands went cold. It was her mother. They hadn't seen each other in 8 years. Not since the trial. Ivy's students noticed the change in her energy. Miss Ivy, one of them asked, "You okay?" Ivy forced a smile. "Take a break," she said. "Practice what we learned. I'll be back in a minute." She walked to the doorway, stood face to face with the woman who'd given birth to her, but had never really been a mother. Neither of them spoke at first. The silence was heavy, suffocating. Finally, her mother broke it. "I saw the article," she said quietly, "about your school, about what you've been doing." Ivy waited, didn't respond, didn't make it easy. Her mother shifted uncomfortably. "I'm sorry," she said. The words hung in the air like smoke. "I should have protected you. I should have believed you. I was scared of him, scared of being alone. And I let that fear destroy you. There's no excuse. I know that. But I'm sorry." Ivy stared at her. Part of her wanted to scream, to rage, to demand answers for 8 years of abandonment. But another part of her, the part that had grown in Westmoor, the part that had learned to let go, just felt tired. I forgive you, Ivy said quietly. Not because her mother deserved it, but because Ivy deserved peace. But I can't have you in my life. Not now. Maybe not ever. You made your choice. And I've made mine. I've built something here. Something good. And I can't let you undo that. Her mother's eyes filled with tears. She nodded. I understand, she whispered. Then she turned and walked away. Ivy watched her go, watched her disappear down the street, and she felt something shift inside her chest. Relief. Closure. The final piece of her past falling into place. She didn't need her mother's apology to heal. She'd already healed, but having it, releasing it, letting it go, that felt like freedom. Real freedom. The kind that came from within. Not from judges or lawyers or anyone else. Just from her. From choosing herself. From deciding that her worth wasn't tied to who stayed or who left. It was just hers. Always had been. Always would be. And that realization, that truth, was what finally set her free. Years passed. The school thrived. Ivy watched her students grow. Graduate. Go to college. Get jobs. Build lives. Some stayed in touch. Others disappeared. But all of them carried something from her. A lesson. A song. A memory that they weren't alone. That someone had believed in them when nobody else did. And that was Ivy's legacy. Not the headlines. Not the trials. Not the corruption she'd exposed. But the lives she'd touched. The hope she'd given. The second chances she'd created. That was what mattered. That was what lasted. And every time Ivy picked up her cello and played, she remembered. Remembered Elaine. Remembered Westmoor. Remembered the girl she used to be and the woman she'd become. And she was proud, not of the pain, but of the survival, of the choice to keep going, of the decision to turn her trauma into something beautiful, something that helped others, something that mattered. Have you ever done everything right and still been blamed for everything wrong? Have you ever forgiven people who didn't deserve it just so you could be free? That's why Ivy's story matters. Not because she was perfect, but because she was human, flawed, afraid, angry, and still chose hope, still chose kindness, still chose to believe that broken things could make beautiful music. And in a world that tries to silence girls like her, that choice, that defiance, that refusal to stay broken, that's everything. That's the real story. Not the one the media told, but the one she lived. Day by day, note by note, until she became exactly who she was always meant to be. A survivor, a teacher, a warrior, and finally, peacefully, herself.